The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while Emma Torres was calculating whether she could stretch 2 packages of ramen across 3 days. Her daughter Sofia sat at their studio apartment's only table, practicing multiplication on the back of junk mail because notebooks cost money Emma didn't have. "Ms. Torres? This is Gerald Hutchins from Hutchins and Associates in Adelaide. I'm calling regarding the estate of Marianne Torres." Emma's hand tightened on the phone. Her grandmother, the woman who'd sent exactly 3 birthday cards in Emma's entire 31 years, each one containing $5 and nothing else. No letters, no phone calls, no relationship. She passed 6 weeks ago. "I'm sorry for your loss." Emma felt nothing. How could you grieve someone who'd been a stranger? "Okay, there's a small matter of inheritance. Nothing significant, I'm afraid. A mining claim in Cobber Pte, South Australia. Abandoned since the 1990s. The property taxes are overdue by $17,000 Australian. If you don't pay within 60 days, the government will seize it." Emma almost laughed. Of course, even in death, her grandmother managed to be a burden rather than a blessing. "How much is the property worth?" Papers rustled on the other end. "Hard to say. The mine collapsed in 1996. Total structural failure. The claim is essentially worthless. Perhaps $500 if someone wanted the land for scrap metal salvage. But the tax debt makes it a liability. So I inherit $17,000 of debt for a collapsed hole in the ground." That's essentially correct. Unless you'd like to pay the taxes and claim ownership, I'd recommend signing the rejection paperwork I'll email you. The government will absorb the debt and auction the property. Emma should have said yes immediately. Should have rejected this final insult from a grandmother who'd never cared enough to visit. Who'd let Emma's mother raise a child alone in poverty. Who'd watch from across an ocean while Emma struggled through every difficulty that came from being poor in America. But something made her pause. "Send me everything you have. Photos, documents, location. I'll think about it." After he hung up, Emma opened her laptop, the one she'd bought used for $80 and nursed along for 4 years. She searched Cobber Pte Opal mining and fell into a rabbit hole of articles about Australia's opal capital, a desert town where half the population lived underground to escape 120-degree heat, where fortunes had been made and lost based on what you found beneath the red dirt. The photos showed a lunar landscape, hills pockmarked with mine shafts, mountains of white tailings, dugout homes carved into hillsides. It looked like Mars. It looked like nowhere anyone would choose to go. Sofia appeared at her shoulder. "What's that, Mama?" "Your great-grandmother lived there. In Australia. She died. Did you know her?" "No, baby. I didn't." Sofia studied the photos with the intense focus she brought to everything. "It looks lonely." Emma closed the laptop. "Yeah, it does." That evening, after Sofia was asleep, Emma did the calculations she'd been avoiding. She had $642 in checking. Next month's rent was $850. She was 3 weeks behind. The landlord had been patient, but patience had limits. Her car needed $400 of repairs to pass inspection. She owed the electric company $270. Her phone was getting shut off Friday without a payment of $65. She worked as a home health aide, 28 hours weekly at $15 an hour. Not enough to survive on. Not enough to save. Barely enough to delay the inevitable collapse. The email from the Australian lawyer arrived at 10:30. She opened the attachments with shaking hands. The first was a deed. Marianne Torres, sole owner of mining claim 4721, Cobber Pte, South Australia. Registered 1962. Property description, 1 acre, including collapsed mine shaft, approximately 60 feet deep. No structures. No utilities. No road access beyond 4-wheel drive track. The second attachment was photos. Recent ones, taken by a property assessor. The mine entrance was a crater. The ground had caved in, leaving a bowl-shaped depression filled with 30 years of wind-blown dirt and debris. Rusted equipment lay scattered across the tailings. A sun-bleached sign warned of unstable ground. It was worthless. Objectively, completely worthless. The third attachment was a handwritten letter, scanned into the system. The writing was shaky, the hand of someone very old or very ill. To whoever inherits this claim, I bought this mine in 1962 with everything I had. 60 years of my life went into the ground here. I never found what I was looking for. Maybe you will. They're the lockbox. Underground. The entrance collapsed, but the lockbox is still there. I couldn't get to it after the accident. I tried for years. The combination is your birthday. Emma's birthday. I remembered even when I couldn't remember anything else. I'm sorry I was never the grandmother you needed. I was too broken by what happened here. Too ashamed of failure. But I never forgot you. And I left you the one thing that mattered. Marianne, Emma read it 3 times. Her birthday. How did her grandmother even know her birthday when she'd never acknowledged it? Wasn't a lockbox worth mentioning in a deathbed letter? She researched property values in Cobra PD. Collapsed mines sold for scrap metal value, usually a few $100s. Active claims could be worth millions if they produced opals. But this might have been worked for decades and abandoned as played out. The smart decision was obvious. Sign the rejection paperwork. Let the government deal with it. Walk away from another disappointment in a life full of them. But Emma thought about Sofia, about raising a daughter in a studio apartment where they shared a bed, about working jobs that paid poverty wages while prices rose every month, about being 31 years old with nothing to show for a decade of grinding labor except debt and exhaustion. She thought about her mother, who died when Emma was 19, who'd worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford the medical care that might have saved her life, who'd never had a chance at anything better because she'd started from nothing and the system was designed to keep people there. And she thought about the letter. I left you the one thing that mattered. What could possibly matter in a collapsed hole in the Australian desert? At 2 in the morning, Emma made a decision that logic couldn't justify. She emailed the lawyer. I'll pay the taxes. I need to see the property first. Can you arrange a visit? His response came an hour later. Australian business hours. Ms. Torres, I must advise against this. The taxes are 17,000 Australian dollars, roughly 11,000 US. The property is worthless. You'd be throwing money away. She wrote back, I understand, but I need to see it anyway. Can I make installment payments on the taxes? The government requires full payment within 60 days. After that, they seize the property. Emma looked at her bank balance, looked at the studio apartment walls closing in, looked at Sofia sleeping peacefully, unaware that her mother was about to make a catastrophically stupid decision. She had one asset, the only thing of value she owned, her mother's engagement ring, white gold with a small diamond. Her mother had worn it every day, even though Emma's father had left before Emma was born. It was worth maybe $3,000. Maybe. Emma had sworn she'd never sell it. It was the last connection to her mother, the last piece of family history, the only heirloom she had to pass to Sofia someday. She pulled it from the drawer where she kept it wrapped in tissue paper, held it up to the lamplight. The diamond was tiny, barely a quarter carat, but had been her mother's dream, the symbol of a love that hadn't lasted, but had meant something once. I'm sorry, Mama, she whispered, but I think maybe this is what you'd want. One chance at something better. The next morning, Emma called the estate lawyer back. I'm coming to Australia. I'll pay the taxes. I just need 60 days. She could hear his disapproval through the phone. Ms. Torres, this is highly inadvisable. The property has no value. You're spending money you clearly don't have on a trip that will only confirm what I'm telling you now. Maybe, but it's mine to waste. She sold the ring that afternoon, got $2,800 from a jeweler who knew she was desperate and negotiated accordingly. It hurt worse than she'd expected. Felt like betraying her mother's memory. But she did it anyway. The plane tickets cost $1,400 for her and Sofia. Cheapest red-eye flights with 2 connections. They'd arrive in Adelaide exhausted, but they'd arrive. The bus to Cobra PDE would be another 100. Supplies, maybe 200 more. That left her with $1,100 toward $11,000 in taxes. It was insane. Completely, utterly insane. But Emma had been poor her entire life. Had never taken a risk because she couldn't afford to. Had never had a chance at anything beyond survival. And her grandmother's letter kept echoing in her mind. I left you the one thing that mattered. What if it was real? What if there's actually something there? The odds were 1,000,000 to 1 against. But Emma had learned that sometimes the only difference between people who escape poverty and people who don't is being willing to take one impossible chance when it presents itself. She booked the flights before logic could stop her. The landlord was less understanding. Emma, you're 3 weeks behind. Now you're telling me you're leaving the country? Where's my rent? I'll pay you when I get back. I promise. 2 weeks, that's all. 2 weeks, or I'm filing eviction paperwork. I've been patient, but I've got bills too. Emma packed their suitcase that night. 2 weeks of clothes. Sofia's school books, because they couldn't afford to miss assignments. The laptop. Copies of the property documents. Her mother's photo. And Thomas Morrison's letter, which she'd read so many times she had it memorized. Sofia watched her pack with confusion that gradually shifted to excitement. Are we really going to Australia? Yeah, baby. We really are. Why? How did you explain to a 7-year-old that her mother was gambling everything on a letter from a grandmother that neither of them had known? That they were flying to the other side of the world to look at a hole in the ground that was probably worthless? Because sometimes you have to see for yourself, even when everyone says you're wrong. The flight was hell. 30 hours with connections. Sofia threw up twice. Emma didn't sleep, couldn't afford to buy food at the airport, survived on crackers she'd brought from home. They arrived in Adelaide delirious with exhaustion, stumbling through customs with luggage that felt heavier with each step. The lawyer had arranged a meeting at his office. Gerald Hutchins was exactly what Emma expected. 60s expensive suit, the kind of polite condescension wealthy people reserve for the poor when forced to interact with them. Ms. Torres, I'm surprised you actually came. I said I would. He laid out paperwork, tax bills, property assessments, geological surveys from the 1990s showing the mine was played out. This is the documentation. As you can see, the claim has no commercial value. The collapse in 1996 was complete. The mine is structurally unsound. Even if you wanted to excavate, the cost would be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Emma scanned the documents, not really understanding the technical language, but recognizing the tone. Worthless. Liability. Abandoned. Can I see it? The property? Ms. Torres, it's 850 kilometers from Adelaide. The bus takes 12 hours. There's no accommodation in your price range. And when you get there, you'll find exactly what these reports say. A collapsed hole. I still need to see it. He sighed. The sigh of someone dealing with an idiot who wouldn't listen to reason. Very well. I can arrange transport to Cobra PD. But I'm telling you now, you're wasting your time and money. The bus ride was brutal. 12 hours across landscape that gradually transformed from green to brown to red. Desert stretched in every direction. Heat shimmered off asphalt. Sofia slept against Emma's shoulder while Emma stared out the window and wondered if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. They arrived in Cobra PD at sunset. The town was smaller than Emma expected. A collection of buildings that looked half-buried. Tourist shops selling opals. A hostel advertising underground rooms. Everything covered in fine red dust. Emma found the cheapest accommodation she could. $40 a night for a room with 2 beds and a share bathroom. The sheets were clean. That was all that mattered. The next morning, they hired a 4-wheel drive. The only vehicle that could reach the mining claim on unmaintained tracks. The driver was a man in his 60s, weathered and quiet. He looked at the address Emma gave him and raised an eyebrow. Marianne Torres' claim? That mine's been dead for 30 years. I know. I need to see it anyway. He shrugged. Your money. The drive took an hour. Dirt track that wound through hills pockmarked with old claims. Mine shafts everywhere. Some marked with signs. Others just holes in the ground waiting to swallow the unwary. Sofia pressed her face to the window, eyes wide. Mama, this is like another planet. Yeah, baby, it is. The driver stopped at the base of a hill where tailings formed a white mountain. This is it. Claim 4,721. Can't drive any closer. Ground's unstable. Emma climbed out. The heat hit her like a physical force. Dry, brutal, stealing moisture from her skin immediately. She helped Sofia down, and they stood staring at what her grandmother had left her. The mine entrance was exactly as the photos showed. A crater, 30 feet across, bowl-shaped, filled with debris. Rusted equipment lay scattered across the tailings. An old winch, cable, timber supports that had rotted and collapsed decades ago. It was worse than worthless. It was dangerous, a liability waiting to hurt someone. The driver leaned against his vehicle, lighting a cigarette. Marianne worked this claim for 34 years. Never found anything worth mentioning. She was convinced there was a fortune down there, but the geology didn't support it. When the mine collapsed in '96, it was almost a relief. Saved her from wasting more years. Emma walked slowly toward the crater's edge. The ground was unstable, crumbling under her weight. She could see down into the depression. Dirt and rock and timber. No sign of anything valuable. No sign of a lockbox. There's supposed to be a lockbox. Underground. She mentioned it in her letter. The driver laughed. Not unkindly. Just the tired amusement of someone who'd seen dreamers before. Miss, even if there was, you'd need excavation equipment. Professional crew. Tens of thousands of dollars minimum. And for what? On the off chance your grandmother wasn't just confused at the end? Emma stood at the crater's edge, feeling the weight of her mistake settling over her shoulders. She'd sold her mother's ring, spent money she didn't have, dragged her daughter to the other side of the world. For this, a hole in the ground with nothing in it but dirt and broken dreams. Sofia appeared beside her, taking her hand. Is this it? Is this what great-grandma left us? Emma's throat tightened. Yeah, baby. This is it. It doesn't look like much. No, it doesn't. They stood there in the brutal heat while the driver smoked and waited. Emma tried to figure out her next move. She had maybe $600 left. Not enough to pay the taxes. Not enough to hire excavation equipment. Barely enough to get home. She'd failed. Completely. Catastrophically. The way poor people always failed when they reached for something better. Then Sofia did something unexpected. She picked up a rock from the tailings and threw it into the crater. It landed with a hollow thunk that echoed strangely. That sounded weird, Sofia said. Emma barely registered the comment. She was too busy calculating how many meals she could skip to stretch their remaining money. But Sofia threw another rock. Same hollow sound, different from rocks hitting dirt. Mama, listen. Emma forced herself to focus, to actually hear what her daughter was hearing. Sofia threw a third rock, and this time Emma caught it. That wasn't the sound of rock hitting more rock. That was the sound of something hollow underneath. She scrambled down into the crater, ignoring the driver's warning about unstable ground. Used her hands to clear dirt from where the rocks had landed. 6 inches down, her fingers hit something hard. Smooth. Metal. She dug faster, clearing a 2-foot section. It was a steel plate. Thick. Industrial. Covering something beneath. What is that? Sofia had followed her down, was kneeling beside her, helping clear dirt. I don't know. The driver approached the crater's edge, curiosity overcoming his cynicism. That wasn't there before. Or if it was, nobody knew about it. Emma found the edge of the metal plate, followed it in both directions. It was covering an area at least 6 feet across. She dug around the perimeter until she found what she was looking for. A handle, and beneath the handle, a combination lock. Her hand shook as she cleared dirt from the lock's face. 3 numbers, just like her grandmother's letter said. Emma's birthday, October 15th, 1992. She turned the dial. 10, then 15, then 92. The lock clicked open. Mama, Sofia's voice was small, uncertain. Emma pulled the lock free, gripped the handle. The plate was heavy, but adrenaline made her strong. She heaved it up, and it swung open on hinges that groaned with disuse. Beneath was darkness, a shaft descending straight down, and built into the shaft wall, maybe 6 feet below the surface, was a metal box. The driver moved closer, his cigarette forgotten. Sweet Jesus, that's a vault. Emma lowered herself into the shaft, feet finding crude ladder rungs welded into the wall. The metal was hot from decades of sun, but she climbed down anyway. 6 feet. Then her hands touched the vault. It was bigger than she'd expected. 3 feet wide, 2 feet tall, heavy steel. and it had a combination lock, just like the entry plate. Emma tried her birthday again. October 15th, 92, nothing. Her heart sank. Of course. Why would both locks use the same combination? Then she remembered. Her grandmother's letter. I remembered even when I couldn't remember anything else. What else would Marianne remember? What other date mattered? Emma thought about the property deed. Marianne Torres. Purchase date, 1962. She tried that. Nothing. She tried Marianne's birthday, guessing. Nothing. Sofia called down from above. Mama, are you okay? I'm trying to figure out the combination. What about my birthday? Mine, not yours? Emma's birthday was the entry plate. Sofia's birthday would be. No, that was too simple. But she tried anyway. Sofia was born February 3rd, 2016. Emma turned the dial. February 3rd, 16. The vault clicked open. Emma's hand shook so badly she could barely grip the door. She pulled it open, expecting nothing. Expecting disappointment. Expecting one final insult from a universe that never gave poor people breaks. Instead, she found rocks. Not rocks. Opals. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Filling the vault from bottom to top. Some the size of marbles. Others large as eggs. Colors that shouldn't exist in nature. Blue-green fire frozen in stone. Reds and oranges that seemed to glow from within. Whites that reflected light like shattered rainbows. Emma reached in with trembling hands. Pulled out a stone the size of a baseball. It was heavy. Solid. The colors shifted as she turned it. Fire dancing across its surface. Miss Torres. The driver's voice came from above. You all right down there? Emma climbed up, clutching the stone. Emerged into brutal sunlight that made the opal blaze even brighter. She held it out wordlessly. The driver took it, turned it over. His expression shifted from curiosity to shock to something like fear. Where did you get this? From the vault. There are hundreds more. He stared at her, at the stone, back at her. Ms. Torres, do you know what you're holding? An opal. This is black opal. Queensland boulder. Museum quality. This single stone is worth maybe $50,000. Maybe more. The number didn't register. Couldn't register. There are hundreds, Emma repeated numbly. The driver climbed down into the crater despite his earlier warnings about unstable ground. Lowered himself into the shaft. Emma heard his sharp intake of breath when he saw the vault's contents. He emerged 5 minutes later with 2 more stones. His hands were shaking worse than Emma's had been. Ms. Torres, I don't know where your grandmother got these, but you're holding a fortune that shouldn't exist. He pulled out his phone, made a call. Robert? It's Mike. I need you, the Torres claim. Now, bring your equipment. 20 minutes later, another vehicle arrived. A younger man climbed out, carrying what looked like specialized tools. The driver, Mike, showed him the stones. Robert examined them with a jeweler's loupe, turned them under light. His expression grew more shocked with each stone he assessed. These are real, natural, high quality. Where the hell did Marianne find these? She apparently spent 34 years collecting them without telling anyone, Mike said, and then sealed them in a vault that nobody knew existed. Robert looked at Emma. Ms. Torres, I'm a certified opal appraiser. I worked in Cooper for 20 years. I've never seen a cache like this. Never even heard of one. If all the stones in that vault are this quality. He paused, doing mental calculations. You're looking at millions. Tens of millions. Maybe more. The numbers still wouldn't penetrate. Emma stood in the red dirt of the Australian desert, holding her daughter's hand, trying to understand that everything had just changed. I don't understand, she said. If my grandmother had this, why did she live like she had nothing? Why did she die alone? Mike pulled out the geological surveys, scanned them carefully. According to this, the mine was depleted. No opal seams. She reported finding nothing of value for her entire operation. She paid taxes on worthless land for decades. Why would she lie? Because, Robert said slowly, if word got out that she'd found a major deposit, this whole area would have been overrun. Other miners would have tried to contest her claim. She would have had people trying to steal from her. The only way to protect a find like this was to hide it completely. Pretend it didn't exist. Live like you had nothing while you slowly collected a fortune. Emma thought about her grandmother's letter, about being too ashamed of failure to reach out, about being broken by what happened here. That wasn't shame about failure. That was the burden of secrecy, of having to pretend poverty while sitting on wealth she couldn't reveal without losing everything. She protected it, Emma whispered, for 60 years. Protected it so someone would eventually find it. Protected it for you, Sofia said quietly. She knew your birthday, and mine. She was waiting for us. The weight of that settled over Emma like the brutal desert heat. Her grandmother hadn't abandoned her family out of cruelty or indifference. She'd sacrificed connection to protect something more valuable than money. A future, a chance, an inheritance that could transform everything. Robert was already making calls. Professional appraisers, security services, legal counsel who specialized in mining claims. Ms. Torres, you need to understand something. A fine like this, people will try to steal it. Claim you're lying. Contest ownership. You need legal protection immediately. The next hours blurred together. Professional appraisers arrived with equipment. They cataloged every stone in the vault. 217 opals, ranging from small gems worth thousands to massive stones that made even experienced professionals gasp. The preliminary assessment came just before dark. Robert delivered it with the careful tone of someone delivering news too large to be believed. Ms. Torres, based on conservative valuations, accounting for quality, size, and market demand, we estimate total value at $788 million. Emma sat down in the red dirt. Just sat down because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Sofia sat beside her. Mama, is that a lot? Yeah, baby, that's a lot. But Emma was thinking about something else. About the $17,000 in property taxes. About selling her mother's ring for $2,800. About flying across the world with barely enough money to eat. About standing at this crater's edge 12 hours ago, thinking she'd made the worst mistake of her life. And she was thinking about everyone who'd told her she was wrong. The lawyer who'd called this trip inadvisable. The landlord who'd threatened eviction. Every boss who'd paid minimum wage while telling her to be grateful for the work. Every system that had kept her poor while claiming anyone could succeed through hard work. She'd been one decision away from signing rejection paperwork. One moment of doubt away from never seeing this place. Never finding what her grandmother had protected for 6 decades. Mike sat down beside her, his weathered face showing something like awe. Ms. Torres, your grandmother was a legend in Cobra PD. Everyone thought she was crazy, chasing a mind that didn't exist, living alone in the desert for a dream that never materialized. We all felt sorry for her. He gestured at the vault, at the stones worth more than most people earned in 100 lifetimes. Turns out she wasn't crazy. She was the sanest person here, smart enough to find fortune, and disciplined enough to hide it until the right person came along. Emma pulled Sofia close, felt her daughter's heart beating against her chest, thought about the studio apartment they'd left, the eviction notice that was probably being filed right now, the poverty that had defined every day of Emma's 31 years. All of it was over, in one afternoon, because of a letter, a combination lock, and a grandmother who'd believed that broken things could be beautiful if you protected them long enough. What happens now? Emma asked. Robert crouched down. Now we secure the site. Get legal ownership formally established. You'll need to pay those property taxes within 60 days to maintain claim. Then we'll need to move the stones to secure storage. Get official appraisals. Work with auction houses to maximize value. It'll take time. How much time? 6 months minimum. Maybe a year. But Ms. Torres? He smiled. You'll never be poor again. Not you. Not your daughter. Not for generations. The sun was setting now, turning the desert hills orange and purple. Sofia was asking questions about opals, about how they formed, about why they had so many colors. Robert was explaining geology to a 7-year-old who listened with the same intense focus she brought to multiplication tables. And Emma sat in the dirt of a collapsed mine her grandmother had worked for 60 years, holding a fortune she hadn't earned, hadn't worked for. hadn't even believed existed until hours ago. She thought about her mother's ring, about selling the last connection to family, about the guilt that had consumed her during the flight here. But maybe her mother would understand. Maybe Maria Torres, who died poor despite working 3 jobs, would smile, knowing her daughter had finally escaped the trap that had held their family for generations. That Emma had taken one impossible chance. And won. Emma pulled out her phone. The service was spotty, but she managed to send one email before the signal died. To Gerald Hutchins, Hutchins and Associates subject. Property taxes. Mining claim 4721 Mr. Hutchins. I'll be paying the full $17,000 in taxes. Wire transfer. Please send banking information. Also, please prepare transfer paperwork. I like to establish a trust fund. $50 million. To provide housing for single mothers and their children. Name it the Marianne Torres Foundation. After my mother. Thank you for your concern. It turns out my grandmother knew exactly what she was doing. Best regards, Emma Torres. She hit send before doubt could interfere. 50 million out of 788. A drop, but enough to help thousands of families avoid the poverty that had defined her life. The stars were coming out now. Desert stars that filled the sky edge to edge. Emma had never seen so many. Had never stood in darkness this complete. Sofia leaned against her. Mama, are we really rich now? Yeah, baby, we really are. Good. Can we get a bigger apartment? One where I have my own bed? Emma laughed. Actually laughed. The sound echoing across the tailings. Yeah, baby, you can have your own bed. Your own room. Maybe even your own house. I just want the bed, Sofia said seriously. Houses are too big. Emma pulled her close, breathing in the desert air that smelled like dust and heat and something she couldn't name. Maybe it was possibility. Maybe it was the scent of futures that hadn't existed 12 hours ago. Tomorrow would bring logistics, lawyers, security, the complex work of transforming stones into liquid wealth, of protecting an inheritance that would make them targets. But tonight, Emma just sat with her daughter under impossible stars, holding the weight of what her grandmother had given them. Not just money, not just opals, but proof that sometimes broken people protect beautiful things. That sometimes poverty ends not through grinding labor, but through one grandmother's belief that 60 years of secrecy was worth it if the right person found what she'd hidden. And Emma had found it, against all odds, against all advice, against everything logical and sensible. She'd found it. The security team arrived at dawn. 3 vehicles, 8 personnel, equipment that looked military grade. The lead agent was a woman named Carol Hendricks, mid-40s, with the efficient manner of someone who'd spent decades protecting valuable things from people who wanted to steal them. Ms. Torres, I'm going to be direct. Word is already spreading. A find this size, it doesn't stay secret. By noon, every opportunist in South Australia will know you're sitting on $750 million in unguarded opals. Emma had barely slept. She and Sofia had spent the night in the hostel room, while Mike and Robert took shifts watching the claim. Every creak of the building had her jolting awake, convinced someone was coming to take what they'd just found. What do? First, we move the stones. Now, before anyone gets organized enough to try something stupid, I've arranged armored transport to Adelaide. High-security vault until you decide on permanent storage. The extraction took 4 hours. Each opal was photographed, measured, cataloged, and placed in specialized cases designed to protect delicate stones from shock and temperature changes. Emma watched professional handlers treat her grandmother's collection with reverence that bordered on religious. Robert had brought additional appraisers overnight. 3 of them worked in the shaft, examining stones by specialized lighting, recording observations in technical language Emma couldn't follow. Their expressions said everything their words didn't. This was historic. This was unprecedented. Ms. Torres, one of the appraisers, emerged holding a stone the size of a grapefruit. This is Olympic Australia's quality. We're talking about one of the finest black opals ever discovered. This single stone could sell at auction for 70 to 90 million. Maybe more if collectors get competitive. The number was too large to feel real. Emma nodded like she understood, but her brain had stopped processing value somewhere around million. Sofia sat on the tailings with a security guard who'd been assigned specifically to keep her safe and entertained. She was teaching him multiplication tables. He was pretending not to know answers she clearly thought were challenging. Your daughter's sharp, Carol observed. Figured out the vol combination when you couldn't. She's smarter than I am, Emma said. It wasn't modesty. It was truth. Sofia had her grandmother's intelligence. Maybe she'd inherited other things too. Things that would let her build on this inheritance instead of just spending it. The armored trucks left at noon. 3 vehicles in convoy, each one containing stones worth hundreds of millions. Carol rode in the lead vehicle. Emma and Sofia followed in a separate car with 2 security personnel because Carol explained that you never transported principals with the primary asset. If someone tries to hijack the trucks, they won't know you're not in them. Gives us options. Emma hadn't considered hijacking, hadn't considered that people might actually try to take what she'd found through violence. But Carol's matter-of-fact tone suggested this was routine calculation in her world. The world Emma now inhabited whether she wanted to or not. The drive back to Adelaide passed in silence. Emma watched the desert transform gradually back to civilization while her mind raced through implications she was only beginning to understand. She'd spent her entire life invisible. Poor people were invisible. Society looked through them, not at them. Now she'd be visible. Permanently. Unavoidably. Invisibility brought dangers she'd never had to consider. They arrived at the high-security facility just before sunset. The building was unremarkable from outside. Concrete. No windows, the kind of structure you drive past without noticing. Inside was different. Layers of security. Biometric scanners. Armed guards. Vault doors that looked like they belonged in a bank. Carol led them to a private viewing room while the opals were processed into storage. You'll have 24-hour access, but you'll need to schedule visits in advance. Security protocols. How long do we stay in Adelaide? Emma asked. That's your decision, but I'd recommend staying until you've made some key choices about representation. Legal counsel. Financial management. Security for wherever you plan to live. You're going to need a team, Ms. Torres. People you can trust. And trust is going to be the hardest thing to find. A knock at the door interrupted them. Gerald Hutchins entered, looking substantially less condescending than during their first meeting. Behind him was a woman Emma didn't recognize. 50s, expensive suit, carrying herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to having her presence mean something. Ms. Torres, this is Victoria Chun. She's one of Australia's premier estate attorneys. She specializes in sudden wealth management. Victoria shook Emma's hand firmly. Ms. Torres, Gerald briefed me on your situation. I'll be direct. You need legal protection immediately. This claim is going to be contested. Emma's stomach dropped. Contested? By who? By anyone who thinks they have grounds. Other minors who'll claim your grandmother's original filing was invalid. The Australian government who'll argue the find should be partially nationalized. Distant relatives who'll materialize claiming inheritance rights. Marianne's creditors who'll say debts should be paid from the estate before distribution. But it's mine. The claim is registered in her name. She left it to me. Yes, and we'll defend that. But defense requires lawyers. Lots of them. Expect this to take 18 months minimum. Possibly years. And expect challenges from directions you haven't imagined yet. Victoria pulled out a tablet, showed Emma a preliminary filing. This was submitted this morning. Cooper PDE Mining Association. They're claiming that Marianne Torres violated reporting requirements by failing to disclose her fines. They're arguing the opal should be seized as illegally concealed assets. Emma felt panic rising. Can they do that? No, but they could tie you up in court while they try, which is why you need representation. My firm specializes in exactly this situation. Sudden wealth, contested claims, complex mineral rights. We've handled cases worth billions. How much do you cost? Our standard rate is $800 an hour. But for a case this size, I'd recommend putting us on retainer. $2 million annually, plus expenses and a percentage of successfully defended assets. $2 million. The number that would have represented impossible wealth a day ago now sounded reasonable. That was the most disorienting part. Her sense of scale was breaking. Numbers that should mean something were becoming abstractions. I'll need to think about it. Victoria nodded. Of course. But Ms. Torres, people are organizing against you right now. While you're thinking, they're filing. Every day you wait is a day they gain ground. After Victoria and Gerald left, Carol brought sandwiches from somewhere. Emma hadn't eaten since the previous day. The food tasted like cardboard, but she forced it down because Sofia needed to see her eating. Mama, why do people want to take our stones? How did you explain greed to a 7-year-old? How did you explain that finding something valuable made you a target instead of fortunate? Because they think they deserve it more than we do. But great-grandma left it for us. She said so in the letter. I know, baby, and we're going to keep it. We just have to prove we deserve it. That's stupid. You shouldn't have to prove you deserve presents. Emma pulled Sofia close, breathing in her daughter's shampoo smell. You're right. It is stupid. But that's how the world works when you have something everyone else wants. That night, Emma couldn't sleep despite exhaustion that made her bones ache. She lay in a hostel bed. They'd moved to slightly nicer accommodation, though still nothing fancy, and ran through scenarios that all ended badly. What if the government seized the opals? What if some mining consortium proved Marianne's claim had procedural flaws? What if Emma had spent her last money getting to Australia, only to lose everything in court? At 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep and opened her laptop, started researching Australian mineral rights law. Most of it was incomprehensible legal language, but certain patterns emerged. Claims could be contested on technical grounds. Failure to file proper reports. Violation of environmental regulations. Disputes over boundary lines. Her grandmother had worked the claim for 60 years. 60 years of potential filing errors. 60 years of paperwork that could contain one mistake that invalidated everything. Emma found herself reading Marianne's letter again. I'm sorry I was never the grandmother you needed. I was too broken by what happened here. What had happened? What had broken Marianne so completely that she'd hidden herself and her fortune from the world? Emma searched Marianne Torres PDE and found almost nothing. A few mining registry entries. One mention in a 1987 newspaper article about opal production. No photos. No personal history. Nothing that explained who her grandmother had been beyond a name on legal documents. She tried different search terms. PDE 1962. Opal mining accidents. Mining claim disputes. The third search returned an article from 1965. Fatal mining accident claims 2 lives. Emma's hands shook as she read. 2 miners were killed yesterday when a shaft collapsed at claim 4719, adjacent to claim 4721. Thomas and William Chun, brothers aged 34 and 29, were working a joint claim when structural failure caused a cave-in. Rescue efforts were hampered by unstable ground. Bodies were recovered 3 days later. The incident has raised questions about mining safety regulations. Neighboring claim holder Marianne Torres was questioned about whether her excavation had contributed to the instability. No charges were filed. Emma read it twice. 3 times. Her grandmother's claim. Her grandmother had been questioned in connection with deaths at the adjacent mine. She searched for more. Found a follow-up article from 1966. Chun family lawsuit dismissed. The brothers' families had sued Marianne, claiming her mining operations had undermined the stability of their claim. The court had found no evidence of wrongdoing, but the article noted that Mrs. Torres has ceased all major excavation work and now operates a much smaller operation focused on surface collection. That explained it. That explained everything. Her grandmother had found the opals before 1965, had been working a productive mine. Then the accident happened, the lawsuit, the guilt, even if legally she was blameless. She'd stopped mining, hidden what she'd found, lived with the weight of knowing her search for wealth might have contributed to 2 deaths. And she'd spent the next 60 years protecting what she'd found in secret, too ashamed or too afraid to reveal it. Living in poverty while sitting on a fortune because revealing it would raise questions about when she'd found it. whether she'd been working illegally after the accident, whether the opals were even hers to keep. Emma's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Ms. Torres, this is Robert Ling, grandson of William Chun. We need to talk about your claim. I believe my family has legal standing to contest ownership based on historical boundary disputes. Please contact my attorney. It was starting. Exactly like Victoria predicted. People were organizing, researching, finding angles to attack from. Emma didn't respond. Instead, she called Victoria Chin's emergency number. The attorney answered on the second ring, sounding wide awake despite the hour. Ms. Torres, what's wrong? Emma explained about the article, about the accident in 1965, about the Chun family descendants contacting her. Victoria was quiet for a moment. This is going to complicate things, but it doesn't change the fundamental ownership. Your grandmother's claim was upheld in 1966. The lawsuit was dismissed, but they're going to argue that she mined across boundary lines, that some of the opals rightfully came from claim 4719. Did they? I have no idea. Do you have any of your grandmother's records? Mining logs? Geological surveys? Just the letter. And the opals themselves. Then we'll need to do our own survey. Geological analysis can tell us approximately where opals were formed. If they're all consistent with the geological formation under claim 4721, we can defend against boundary disputes. If some show characteristics of different formation depths or types, that's going to be a problem. How big a problem? Potentially half your inheritance. If they can prove even some stones came from their claim, they'll argue for proportional distribution. Could be 50-50 split. Could be worse. Emma sat on the hostel bed, watching Sofia sleep, and tried to process that she might lose $400 million to people she'd never met over events that happened before she was born. What do I do? You hire me. Tonight, we start defensive research immediately. And Ms. Torres? Don't talk to anyone. Not the Chin family. Not other minors. Not journalists who will absolutely start calling. Everyone who contacts you is either trying to take something or gathering information to help someone else take something. Trust no one. Emma hired her. Signed contracts through email at 3:30 in the morning. $2 million annually plus expenses plus percentage. The numbers that should have been terrifying felt like life rafts. Dawn came. Emma must have slept at some point because she woke to Sofia shaking her shoulder. Mama, there's people outside with cameras. Emma pulled back the curtain. News vans. At least 5 of them. Reporters setting up equipment. A crowd gathering. Her phone was flooded with notifications. Missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Emails from journalists requesting interviews. Text messages from people claiming to be relatives, old friends of Marianne's, business partners who deserve compensation. Carol appeared at their door 10 minutes later. We're moving you. Now, this location is compromised. They were out in 5 minutes. Carol's team created a barrier of bodies between Emma and the cameras while they loaded into vehicles with tinted windows. Reporters shouted questions. Ms. Torres, how does it feel to be worth almost $1 billion? Emma, did you know your grandmother was hiding this fortune? Ms. Torres, the Chin family says you're not the rightful owner. Do you have a response? Carol drove fast, taking turns that seemed random but were clearly planned. Safe house. We use it for clients in situations like yours. Secure location. No press access. The safe house was a modern apartment in a residential building. Top floor. Balcony with views of Adelaide. Security at the elevator. Carol's team swept it before allowing Emma and Sofia inside. You'll stay here until we can arrange permanent accommodations. My team will handle supply runs. You don't leave without security. You don't talk to anyone who approaches you. You don't post on social media. You don't tell anyone where you are. Understood? Emma nodded, feeling like she was in a movie. An absurd movie where poor single mothers suddenly needed bodyguards because they'd found stones in the desert. Sofia explored the apartment with the enthusiasm of a child who'd spent 7 years in a studio. Mama, there's 3 bedrooms and a bathroom with a big tub. Can we keep this one? It's temporary, baby, but it's so nice. That was the thing. This safe house apartment which Carol described as basic protection accommodation, was nicer than anywhere Emma had ever lived. 2,000 square feet, modern appliances, furniture that looked expensive. The kind of place Emma had walked past her entire life thinking it was for other people. Better people. People who'd earned comfort. Now, she was one of those people. Except she hadn't earned anything. She just found something someone else had earned 60 years ago. Victoria called at 9 a.m. We have a problem. Bigger than the Chun family. Emma's stomach clenched. What now? Your grandmother's will. Gerald Hutchins filed it for probate yesterday. Standard procedure. But there's a challenge. Someone named David Torres claims to be Marianne's nephew, your second cousin, if his lineage checks out. He's arguing that as Marianne's closest living relative in Australia, he should inherit everything. That you, as an overseas descendant who'd never met Marianne, have no legitimate claim. But the letter, she left me specific instructions. The letter isn't a legal will. It's a personal note. We can argue intent, but if David Torres can prove closer familial relationship and physical presence, he's got standing. Australian inheritance law gives preference to residents over overseas claimants in contested estates. Emma wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, wanted to demand why the universe gave her this gift only to dangle it just out of reach while everyone else grabbed for pieces. What do? We investigate David Torres. Find out if his claim is legitimate. Find out what his real relationship with Marianne was. And we prepare for a fight. Miss Torres, I need you to understand something. This is going to get ugly. People are going to say terrible things about you, about your grandmother. They're going to dig into your past, looking for anything to discredit you. Every mistake you've made, every job you lost, every bill you didn't pay on time. They'll use it to paint you as an opportunistic American who manipulated a dying woman. I never even met her. I know, but that won't stop them from trying. So I need to know now. Everything. Every skeleton in your closet. Every questionable decision. Every moment in your past that could be weaponized against you. I need to know before they find it. Emma sat down heavily. I don't have skeletons. I've been too poor to afford interesting mistakes. I worked. I raised my daughter. I paid bills late because I didn't have money, not because I'm irresponsible. That's it. That's my whole scandalous life. Good. That actually helps us. You're sympathetic. Single mother, working poor, came to Australia on her last dollar to honor a grandmother she never knew. That's a story that plays well. I don't want to be a story. I just want what's mine. Then you'll need to become a story, because David Torres is already talking to media, and his story is that you're a stranger who swooped in to steal his inheritance. The first interview request came that afternoon. 60 Minutes Australia. Prime time. Millions of viewers. They wanted Emma's side of the story. Carol advised against it. Don't give them ammunition. Don't say anything they can twist. But Victoria disagreed. Public opinion matters. Juries are human. Judges read newspapers. If David Torres controls the narrative, Emma looks like a villain. We need to humanize her. Emma didn't want to be humanized. Didn't want cameras and questions and people judging whether her poverty was authentic enough to deserve sympathy. But she agreed because Victoria said it was necessary. The interview was scheduled for 3 days later, which gave Emma 3 days to panic about saying something wrong. 3 days to watch Sofia play in an apartment they didn't own while Emma tried to figure out how to explain complex inheritance law to millions of strangers who'd already decided she didn't deserve what she'd found. Robert from Cooper PDE called on day 2. Miss Torres, I need to tell you something. About your grandmother. About what really happened in 1965. Emma put him on speaker so Carol could hear. What happened? The accident. The Chun brothers. It wasn't Marianne's fault. Everyone knew it wasn't her fault. But the Chun family needed someone to blame. They sued her anyway. Made her life hell for 2 years. She won the lawsuit, but it destroyed her. She stopped mining because she couldn't face the possibility of causing another accident, even though the first one wasn't her fault. Why are you telling me this? Because I was there. I was 15 years old. My father worked claims nearby. We all watched what happened to Marianne. How she went from this vibrant woman with dreams to someone who barely left her dugout. The guilt ate her alive even though she'd done nothing wrong. And now her nephew, who never visited her once, who didn't even come to her funeral, is trying to take what she spent 60 years protecting for you. Robert's voice cracked. She talked about you. Near the end, I visited sometimes. Brought supplies. She was dying and she knew it. And she told me about her granddaughter in America, about how she'd wanted to reach out but was too ashamed, too afraid you'd judge her for the accident, for failing to find enough opals to matter back when it might have made a difference. She thought she'd failed. She didn't know what she had. That vault, she sealed it in the 70s. Put stones in there as she found them over the years, then stopped checking. Couldn't bear to look at wealth she'd collected while the Chan family struggled with medical bills from trying to save their father, who'd had a stroke. She convinced herself the opals weren't enough to matter, that finding them had cost too much in human suffering to be worth celebrating. Emma pressed her palm against her eyes, trying to stop tears. Her grandmother had spent 60 years carrying guilt for an accident that wasn't her fault, had hidden a fortune because she couldn't reconcile abundance with the deaths that had happened nearby, had died alone thinking she'd failed when actually she'd succeeded beyond any reasonable measure. Robert, will you testify? About what really happened? About who Marianne was? I'll do more than that. I'll get everyone who knew her, everyone who watched David Torres ignore her for 40 years while she struggled alone. We'll make sure the world knows the truth. The 60 Minutes interview happened in the safe house apartment. The reporter was a woman named Jennifer Harding, late 40s, with the sharp intelligence of someone who'd spent decades extracting truth from people who wanted to hide it. She started gentle. Tell me about getting the call. About learning you'd inherited this claim. Emma walked her through it. The lawyer's call. The worthless mine. The decision to see anyway despite every logical reason not to. Why did you come? When everyone said it was worthless. Emma showed her Marianne's letter. Let Jennifer read the words about broken things and shame and leaving the one thing that mattered. I needed to know, even if it was nothing. Even if I'd wasted money, I couldn't afford to waste. I needed to understand why my grandmother spent 60 years alone instead of knowing her family. And what did you find? Emma described the crater, the metal plate, Sofia throwing rocks and hearing the hollow sound, climbing down into the shaft, opening the vault. Jennifer leaned forward. What was that moment like? Seeing the opals? I didn't understand at first. I thought they were just rocks. Pretty rocks. I didn't know what I was looking at until Mike, the driver, he told me. Even then, I couldn't process it. The numbers were too big. They still are. You're now worth approximately $788 million. How does that feel? How did it feel? Like drowning. Like floating. Like being disconnected from reality. It feels impossible. 2 weeks ago, I was calculating whether I could afford ramen. Now people tell me I'm worth numbers I can't even conceptualize. It doesn't feel real. Jennifer shifted topics. David Torres claims you manipulated your grandmother, that you exploited her death for personal gain. How do you respond? Emma felt anger flare. Forced it down. I never met her. I received a letter from her lawyer. I came to see a property everyone said was worthless. I found what she left for me. If that's manipulation, then I don't understand the word. But David Torres says he cared for Marianne, that he was her family. Then where was he? Emma's voice came out harder than intended. Where was he when she was dying alone? Where was he during the 60 years she lived in a dugout in the desert? Robert says David never visited, never called, never acknowledged her existence until there was money involved. So you're saying he's lying? I'm saying his timing is convenient. Jennifer interviewed Sofia next, asked careful, age-appropriate questions about the trip to Australia, about finding the stones. Sofia was matter-of-fact. Great-grandma left us a treasure, like in books, except it was real, and now people are trying to take it because they're greedy. The child's bluntness made Jennifer smile. Do you think it belongs to you? Great-grandma said so. She used my birthday in the combination. She wanted us to have it. People should respect that. The interview aired 2 days later. Emma watched with Carol and Victoria, with Sofia, who wanted to see herself on TV. The editing was fair, more than fair. Jennifer presented Emma as sympathetic, A poor single mother who'd taken chance, who'd found something extraordinary, who was now fighting to keep what a grandmother she'd never known had left her. They included Robert's interview, his descriptions of Marianne's isolation, David Torres's absence, the accident in 1965 that had broken Marianne's spirit, and they included David Torres's response, filmed outside his suburban Adelaide home. "I love my aunt. I visited when I could. This American woman knows nothing about our family, nothing about Marianne. She's a stranger trying to steal what should pass to blood relatives who actually cared." The interviewer had pressed him, "But records show you didn't attend Marianne's funeral, that you haven't been to Coober PDE in over 20 years. David's expression had hardened. "My relationship with my aunt is none of this woman's business. The law will decide who the rightful heir is, and I'm confident it will decide in favor of family who actually knew her." The interview ended with Jennifer's voiceover. "The legal battle is just beginning. But the heart of this case is a question about what we owe to family, about whether blood relations trump explicit wishes, about whether a grandmother who never met her granddaughter can still choose to leave her everything. Australian courts will decide, but the human question remains. What would Marianne Torres want?" Public opinion shifted almost immediately. Social media exploded with debate. Most people sided with Emma. Single mother, poor, took a risk, found treasure, keep it. But a vocal minority supported David. "He's Australian. He's family. Americans always think they can take what they want." Victoria called that evening. The interview helped. Public pressure won't decide the case, but it makes David Torres look bad. That matters. Judges are human. They read the news. What happens now? Now we prepare for court. Preliminary hearing is in 3 weeks. David's team will argue that the will should be overturned based on your lack of relationship with Marianne. We'll argue that Marianne's letter and the specific combination locks demonstrate clear intent. She wanted you to have the Opals. And the Chen family? Different case. Different court. That one's more complicated because it involves property boundaries and historical mining disputes. We've got geologists working on surveys now, trying to determine if any opals could have originated from claim 4719. What if they did? Then we negotiate a settlement. Give them something to make this go away. 20 million. 30. Whatever it takes to clear the title. 20 million. Given away like it was nothing. Because when you had 788 million, 20 million was just the cost of peace. Emma's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "Ms. Torres, I'm a producer for The View in New York. We'd love to have you on the show. Discuss your story. Share your experiences. We can offer $50,000 for exclusive U.S. interview rights." Another text. "Emma Torres, People magazine. We want to feature your story. Human interest piece. Rags to riches. Can we schedule an interview?" Another. "Ms. Torres, Netflix documentary division. We're interested in acquiring rights to your story. Please contact us." The offers kept coming. Everyone wanted a piece. Everyone wanted to profit from her story. Some offered money. Others offered exposure. All of them wanted something she wasn't sure she wanted to give. Carol reviewed the offers with her. "You don't have to respond to any of these. You don't owe them anything." But Victoria disagreed. Careful exposure could be valuable. Keep you sympathetic. Make it harder for David Torres to paint you as a villain. Plus, frankly, the money doesn't hurt. 50,000 from The View could cover your living expenses while we sort out the inheritance. Emma looked at Sofia, who was drawing pictures of opals in colored pencil. Her daughter had adjusted to their new reality with the flexibility of childhood, accepted that they now lived in a safe house, that mama had bodyguards, that they were rich but also not rich until the courts decided. "I don't want to be famous. I don't want people knowing my story." "Too late," Carol said bluntly. "You're already famous." The interview went viral. 5 million views in 2 days. People are invested in your story now, whether you like it or not. You can control the narrative or let others control it for you. Emma chose The View. One appearance. Controlled environment. $50,000 that would help with legal fees and living expenses until the inheritance cleared. They flew to New York a week later, first class, because Carol insisted they couldn't risk economy where Emma would be accessible to strangers. The flight attendants recognized her. Passengers stared. One woman asked for an autograph. Emma signed it because refusing felt rude. But the experience was surreal. She was famous for finding something, for inheriting luck, not for doing anything worthwhile. The View interview was different from 60 Minutes. Less serious, more entertainment. But the hosts were sympathetic. Asked about Sofia, about what Emma planned to do with the money. First, I'm going to make sure I actually get to keep it. Then, I don't know. I've spent my whole life poor. I don't know how to be anything else. I don't know what rich people do. Whoopi Goldberg smiled. Honey, rich people do whatever they want. That's the whole point of money. Freedom to choose. I've never had choices before. It's overwhelming. So start small. What's one thing you've always wanted but couldn't afford? Emma thought about it. Medical care. Good medical care. For Sofia. She has asthma. We've been managing with cheap inhalers. But I've always worried. What if she has a serious attack? What if I can't afford the emergency room? The audience went quiet. That was the thing about poverty. It made you choose between health and rent, between medicine and food. Rich people never understood because they never had to choose. Well, Whoopi said softly, you can afford the emergency room now. You can afford the best doctors, the best treatment. You can afford to stop worrying. That was when Emma cried, on national television, in front of millions of people, because the relief of knowing Sofia would be okay, that she could get help without Emma having to choose between her daughter's health and keeping a roof over their heads, that hit harder than any amount of money. The interview ended with Sunny Hostin asking about Emma's plans. If you win in court, if you get to keep all $788 million, what will you do? Emma had thought about this. During sleepless nights in the safe house, during flights across oceans, during quiet moments when Sofia was asleep and Emma could think without constant crisis management. I'm going to build housing for single mothers, for families like us who work full-time but can't afford rent. I'm going to create places where people don't have to choose between food and medicine, between keeping the lights on and keeping their kids. She paused, making sure her next words were clear. My mother died because she couldn't afford health care. My grandmother died, alone because guilt made her hide from the world. I'm not going to let that money sit in a vault. I'm going to use it to make sure other people don't have to suffer the way we suffered. The audience applauded. The host looked moved. Emma felt exposed and vulnerable and determined all at once. Back in Adelaide, the legal preparations intensified. Victoria's team had compiled evidence. Marianne's mining logs from 1962 to 1996. Testimony from Coober PD residents. Geological surveys proving the opals came from claim 4721's unique formation. And they had the letter. Marianne's handwritten words. The specific combinations she'd chosen. The way she protected Emma's inheritance for decades. David Torres' team had countered with their own evidence. Photos of David with Marianne from the 1980s. A few letters. Testimony from a neighbor who remembered David visiting occasionally. It wasn't much, but it was something. Evidence of relationship Emma couldn't match because she'd been across an ocean, unaware her grandmother existed. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for Monday. Victoria prepared Emma for what to expect. It's not a trial. It's a determination of standing. The judge will decide if David has legitimate grounds to contest the will. If she says yes, we go to full trial. If she says no, he's out and you inherit. What are our chances? 60-40 in our favor. Maybe 70-30. The letter is powerful evidence of intent. But Australian law is complicated around overseas heirs. Could go either way. Sunday night, Emma couldn't sleep. She sat on the safe house balcony, watching Adelaide's lights, trying to prepare for the possibility that tomorrow she'd lose everything. Sofia appeared beside her, wrapped in a blanket. Can't sleep either? No, baby. Are we going to lose the stones? I don't know. Sofia leaned against her. Great-grandma wanted us to have them. That should matter. It should. But sometimes what should matter doesn't. Sometimes the world doesn't work the way it should. That's not fair. No, it's not. They sat together in silence until Sofia fell asleep against Emma's shoulder. Emma carried her back to bed, tucked her in, and stood watching her daughter sleep. Tomorrow would determine everything. Tomorrow a judge would decide if Emma deserved what Marianne had left her, if decades of intention and planning and protection meant anything against blood claims and legal technicalities. Emma pulled out Marianne's letter. Read it one more time in the darkness. I'm sorry I was never the grandmother you needed. I was too broken by what happened here. Emma understood now. Understood the weight Marianne had carried. The guilt that had shaped 60 years of isolation. The determination to protect something valuable for someone she'd never meet. And Emma made a decision. Whether she won tomorrow or lost, whether she kept $788 million or ended up with nothing, she'd honor what Marianne had really left her. Not money, not stones, but proof that broken people could protect beautiful things. That shame and isolation didn't have to mean failure. That sometimes the most valuable inheritance was knowing you came from someone who never gave up, even when giving up would have been easier. Emma folded the letter carefully, put it in her pocket, and tried to sleep before tomorrow arrived with all its terrible possibility. The courtroom was smaller than Emma expected. Modern, sterile, with wood paneling that looked expensive but felt cold. She sat beside Victoria at the plaintiff's table, hands folded to stop them shaking. Carol sat directly behind them, a reassuring presence that suggested if this went badly, at least Emma would have safe transportation away from the disaster. David Torres sat across the aisle with his legal team. 3 lawyers in suits that probably cost more than Emma used to make in a month. David himself was mid-50s, well-dressed, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned whether he deserved good things. He glanced at Emma once. The look wasn't hostile exactly, more dismissive, like she was an inconvenience he'd soon dispense with. The judge entered. Justice Sarah Pemberton, 60s, gray hair pulled back severely, expression that revealed nothing. Everyone stood until she gestured them down. This is a preliminary hearing to determine standing in the matter of estate of Marianne Torres, deceased. Mr. Harrison, you represent the contestant? David's lead attorney stood. Marcus Harrison, silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of lawyer who made other lawyers nervous. Yes, Your Honor. We're contesting the distribution of assets to Ms. Emma Torres, an overseas claimant with no established relationship to the deceased. Ms. Chun, you represent the named beneficiary? Victoria stood. Yes, Your Honor. We're defending Marianne Torres's explicit wishes as demonstrated through documented evidence and clear intent. Justice Pemberton nodded. Mr. Harrison, present your argument. What followed was 2 hours of legal language Emma barely understood. Harrison argued that Australian inheritance law prioritized established family relationships. That David Torres, as Marianne's nephew who resided in Australia, who had documented contact with the deceased, who understood Australian culture and community standards, should inherit over a stranger from America who'd never met Marianne. He presented photographs. David with Marianne at Christmas 1983. A letter from 1987 where Marianne mentioned David's visit. Testimony from a neighbor who remembered David stopping by occasionally. This woman, Harrison gestured at Emma without looking at her, appeared only after Marianne's death, only after learning of valuable assets. She claims a relationship based solely on blood, with no evidence of actual connection. My client, conversely, maintained consistent contact over decades. He was family in the meaningful sense, in the way that actually matters. Victoria countered during her turn. She presented Marianne's letter. Read it aloud in the quiet courtroom. To whoever inherits this claim. The combination is your birthday. Emma's birthday. I remembered, even when I couldn't remember anything else. This is not ambiguous language, Your Honor. Marianne Torres specifically intended her granddaughter to inherit. She created multiple locks with combinations that only Emma could solve. She wrote explicitly about leaving the one thing that mattered. This is documented intent that supersedes proximity or casual relationship. Victoria presented testimony from Robert and 3 other Cobra PDE residents. All of them said the same thing. David Torres hadn't visited in decades. hadn't attended the funeral, had shown no interest in Marianne until valuable assets appeared. Mr. Torres wants us to believe he cared for his aunt, but care is demonstrated through action, not through convenient retrospective claims. He wasn't there when Marianne needed family. He's only here now because $788 million makes family feeling remarkably easy to discover. The testimony went on, back and forth. Harrison arguing that Emma had no standing. Victoria arguing that intent was clear and documented. Then Justice Pemberton asked the question that made Emma's stomach drop. Ms. Chun, your client never met the deceased, never spoke to her, never wrote to her. How do we know Ms. Torres didn't manipulate the situation? Perhaps she learned of the inheritance and fabricated evidence to support her claim? Victoria didn't hesitate because, Your Honor, Emma Torres couldn't have known about the inheritance before arriving in Australia. The opals were hidden in a sealed vault underground. Even Marianne's lawyer didn't know their value. Emma came to Australia thinking she'd inherited a worthless collapse mine. She paid her own expenses with money she couldn't afford to spend. She opened the vault using her daughter's birthday as the combination, a birthday Marianne somehow knew despite never meeting either of them. The sophistication required to fabricate this scenario exceeds plausibility. And yet, Justice Pemberton said, manipulation by overseas parties seeking to exploit elderly Australians is not unprecedented. How do we know Marianne wasn't confused at the end? Senile? Manipulated by someone who learned her granddaughter existed and saw opportunity? Emma wanted to stand up, wanted to shout that she'd never manipulated anyone, that she'd been surviving on ramen while her grandmother died, that she hadn't even known opals existed beyond vague awareness they were gemstones. But Victoria had coached her. Stay quiet. Look sympathetic. Let the lawyers handle it. Your Honor, Victoria said carefully, Marianne Torres demonstrated no signs of cognitive decline. Her letter is coherent. Her planning was sophisticated. She created a system that would protect valuable assets for decades and deliver them specifically to her granddaughter when Emma reached age appropriate to handle them. This required long-term thinking and careful execution, not the behavior of someone confused or manipulated. Justice Pemberton made notes. I'll take this under advisement. Both parties will be notified of my decision within 2 weeks. Court adjourned. 2 weeks. 14 days of waiting to learn if Emma kept everything or lost it to a man who'd ignored his aunt until money appeared. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Questions shouted from multiple directions. Emma, how do you feel about the hearing? Do you think you'll win? What will you do if you lose? Carol's team created a barrier, pushed through to vehicles waiting with engines running. They were inside and moving before Emma fully processed what had happened. Back at the safe house, Emma collapsed on the couch. Sofia curled up beside her, and they sat in silence while the implications settled. Victoria arrived an hour later with takeout. None of them felt like eating. It went as well as could be expected. She thinks I manipulated my grandmother. She's required to consider all possibilities. But Emma, the evidence is on our side. The letter, the combinations, the testimony from Cooper PD. Harrison's case is weak. He's relying on proximity and hoping the judge values physical presence over documented intent. What are the real odds? Victoria was quiet for a moment. 65-35 in our favor. Maybe 70-30. I think we'll win. But nothing's certain until the judgment comes through. The waiting was worse than the hearing. Emma tried to distract herself with Sofia's schoolwork, with apartment hunting in case they won, with anything that kept her mind from spinning through scenarios where she lost everything. Messages kept coming. More interview requests. More offers to tell her story. A book deal. Movie rights. Everyone wanted a piece of Emma Torres, the poor single mother who might become a billionaire or might end up with nothing. One message stood out, from an attorney in Wyoming representing her former landlord. Ms. Torres, you owe 3 months back rent totaling $2,550. We're prepared to file suit unless payment is received within 10 days. Emma stared at it. $2,500, an amount that would have destroyed her 2 months ago, that now felt laughably small against $788 million. Except she didn't have $788 million. She had $600 in her checking account and no income. She forwarded the email to Victoria. Can they actually sue me while this is pending? Victoria responded within minutes. Unfortunately, yes. Your assets are frozen until inheritance clears, but your debts remain active. I can negotiate on your behalf. Offer payment contingent on favorable judgment. Emma wanted to laugh or cry or both. She was potentially worth more than most people earned in 1,000 lifetimes, and she still couldn't pay rent. Day 5 of waiting brought new legal challenges. The Mining Association filed formal objections. Environmental groups claimed the excavation site should be protected. A geological society argued the opals belonged in museums, not private hands. Each objection required response. Each response cost money Emma didn't have. Victoria's firm was working on contingency now. They'd get paid when Emma got paid. But expenses still accumulated. Expert witnesses, research, filing fees. How much do I owe? Emma asked during a strategy session. Victoria checked her tablet. As of today, $430,000 in legal expenses. That's discounted because we're contingent. Normal billing would be closer to $800,000. $430,000. A number that should have terrified Emma. Instead, it just felt surreal. Everything felt surreal. Living in a safe house. Owing millions to lawyers. Waiting for a judge to decide if she'd remain poor or become wealthy beyond comprehension. Day 8 brought unexpected visitors. Carol entered the safe house living room with two people Emma didn't recognize. A woman in her 70s, Chinese, moving with the careful dignity of someone who'd learned long ago that the world didn't automatically grant her respect. And a man in his 50s, also Chinese, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Ms. Torres, Carol said, this is Margaret Chun and her son, David Chun, descendants of the miners who died in 1965. Emma stood slowly. These were the people whose family had sued her grandmother, whose ancestors had died in the accident that broke Marianne's spirit. Margaret Chun spoke first. Her English was accented but clear. Ms. Torres, I need to tell you something. About your grandmother. About what really happened. They sat. Carol remained standing positioned. Between Emma and the door. Margaret pulled out old photographs, documents yellowed with age. My husband's father, William Chun, died in that collapse. His brother Thomas died beside him. Our family was destroyed. 2 breadwinners gone. My mother-in-law spent her last years in poverty. We blamed Marianne Torres. We sued her. We made her life hell. Margaret's voice wavered. We were wrong. She spread documents across the coffee table. Engineering reports from 1965. Geological surveys. Official findings from the mining investigation. The collapse was caused by a natural fault line, not by Marianne's excavation. Not by anything she did. The investigators determined this conclusively. But our family was grieving. We needed someone to blame. So we blamed her. We pursued the lawsuit even after the evidence cleared her. We made her suffer for our loss. David Chun, her son, spoke up. His voice was tight with emotion Emma couldn't quite read. We received a portion of the Mining Association's payment back then. $20,000. Split between families. It was nothing compared to what we'd lost, but it came from making your grandmother's life miserable, from driving her into isolation. Why are you telling me this? Emma's voice came out harder than intended. Margaret met her eyes directly. Because my son, Robert Chun, William's other grandson, he filed the claim against your inheritance. And I'm here to tell you he's withdrawing it. We have no right to your grandmother's opals. We took enough from her. We won't take from you too. She pushed papers across the table. Legal documents. Withdrawal of claim. Notarized. Official. Robert called me after seeing your interview. After learning what Marianne had endured. The guilt she carried for decades over an accident that wasn't her fault. An accident our family blamed her for. We realized we'd spent 60 years compounding injustice. We won't do it anymore. Emma didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to process this reversal. Your grandson said he had evidence. Boundary disputes. Geological surveys proving some opals came from your claim. David Chun shook his head. He was wrong. Or maybe desperate. Our family has struggled financially. The idea of millions from a successful claim. It was tempting, but it's not true. The geological surveys show all the opals came from your grandmother's claim, from formations that don't extend under our old property. We have no legitimate case. Just hope born from old grievances. Margaret stood, moving with difficulty. I'm 83 years old. I've carried guilt for 6 decades about what we did to Marianne Torres. I won't die carrying guilt about what we did to her granddaughter. Please accept our apology and our withdrawal. After they left, Emma sat staring at the legal documents that eliminated one of her biggest threats. Sofia appeared from her room where she'd been doing homework. Who were they? Family of the men who died near great-grandma's mine. They came to say sorry. That's good. People should say sorry when they're wrong. The simplicity of childhood morality. Emma wished adult ethics were that straightforward. Day 12 of waiting brought an unexpected call. Victoria, her voice tight with controlled excitement. The judge issued her ruling early. We have her decision. Emma's heart stopped. And judgment in favor of Emma Torres. David Torres's claim is dismissed with prejudice. You inherit all of it, the full estate. Emma sat down before her legs gave out. We won. We won. Justice Pemberton's ruling is clear. She found Marianne's intent was explicit and documented. That David Torres's claims of relationship were insufficient to overcome clear testamentary wishes. That proximity doesn't supersede explicit bequests. Emma, you're a billionaire. The word didn't feel real. Couldn't feel real. What happens now? Now we finalize probate. Transfer assets to your control. Set up trusts and management structures. You'll need to meet with financial advisors, tax attorneys, estate planners. But Emma, it's over. You won. The news spread immediately. Within hours, reporters were camped outside the building again. Emma's phone exploded with messages. Congratulations. Interview requests. Investment opportunities. Everyone wanting something from the woman who'd just won $750 million. That evening, Emma took Sofia to the balcony. They stood looking out at Adelaide's lights while Emma tried to process the magnitude of what had just happened. We really get to keep it? Sofia asked. Yeah, baby. We really do. Are we rich now? Yes. Very rich. Sofia thought about this seriously. Can we get an apartment with more than one bathroom? I don't like sharing. Emma laughed. Actually laughed. After months of stress and legal battles and existential uncertainty, her daughter's biggest concern was bathroom access. Yeah, baby. We could get multiple bathrooms. Good. That's all I want. The financial planning began immediately. Victoria introduced Emma to a team of specialists. Tax attorneys who explained that Australian inheritance taxes would consume roughly 40%. That left $470 million. Still an incomprehensible amount. Estate planners walked her through trust structures. How to protect wealth across generations. How to ensure Sofia would be provided for. How to set up charitable foundations. Investment advisors presented strategies. Conservative portfolios. Growth opportunities. Real estate. International diversification. Emma nodded along, understanding maybe 20% of what they said. The most important meeting was with Patricia Wong, a wealth manager who specialized in sudden inheritance cases. Ms. Torres, the first thing you need to understand is that this money will change everything. Your relationships, your sense of self, your daily reality. People who weren't interested in you before will suddenly find you fascinating. Old friends will need loans. Family members you've never met will surface with problems only you can solve. Patricia spoke from experience. She'd managed sudden wealth for lottery winners, inheritance recipients, people who'd stumbled into fortune. You need boundaries. Immediately. Decide now who you'll help and who you won't. Decide what you want this money to do. Because if you don't decide, other people will decide for you. Emma had thought about this during the waiting period. Had spent sleepless nights planning. I want to build housing. Free or subsidized housing for working families who can't afford market rates. I want medical clinics. Free health care for people who can't afford insurance. I want child care centers. Education programs. All the things that would have made my mother's life survivable. Patricia made notes. That's good. Specific. Achievable. We can structure foundations to accomplish those goals while preserving capital for ongoing operations. You can change the lives of thousands of people without depleting your resources. How much can I give away? How much do you want to give away? Emma thought about the number Victoria had mentioned. 470 million after taxes. Half. 235 million for charitable work. The rest invested to provide ongoing income and security for Sofia. Patricia didn't blink. That's feasible. Admirable. Most sudden wealth recipients spend the first year buying toys. You're thinking about legacy. That suggests maturity that will serve you well. The foundation structure took weeks to establish. Emma named it the Marianne Torres Foundation, honoring the grandmother who'd made everything possible. The mission was simple: provide housing, healthcare, and education to working families struggling with poverty. The first project would be in Wyoming. 50 units of family housing, below-market rent, quality construction, support services, everything Emma had needed and never had access to. Construction began while Emma was still in Australia finalizing paperwork. She watched blueprints transform into foundations through photos contractors sent. Watched walls rise. Watched a building take shape that would house 50 families who'd otherwise be one paycheck away from homelessness. The medical clinics came next. 3 of them, in communities with limited healthcare access. Free primary care, dental, mental health services. Everything funded by the foundation Emma had created with money her grandmother had hidden for 60 years. The media coverage shifted. Emma was no longer just the lucky woman who'd inherited a fortune. She was the woman using that fortune to address problems she understood intimately because she'd lived them. 60 Minutes did a follow-up. Showed Emma touring the Wyoming housing project, talking with future residents, explaining why this mattered. I spent my whole life one crisis away from homelessness, one medical emergency, one job loss, one car breakdown. That's how most poor people live, always on the edge, never able to get ahead because you're too busy surviving. This housing means families don't have to live that way. They can breathe, save money, plan for futures, all the things rich people take for granted. 6 months after the judgment, Emma returned to the United States. Not to the studio apartment she'd been evicted from, to a modest house in Denver. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, nothing ostentatious. She didn't need a mansion, just space and security. Sofia started at a private school with small class sizes and teachers who cared. Her asthma was managed with the best medication available. She joined clubs, made friends, became a child who didn't worry about money because money was no longer something to worry about. Emma hired a small staff, security because wealth made you a target, a personal assistant to manage the endless administrative tasks that came with running foundations, a tutor for Sofia, a chef who taught Emma to cook properly because she'd spent 30 years eating whatever was cheapest. But she kept perspective, remembered what Patricia had said. Money changes everything. Old friends from Wyoming did resurface, some wanting loans, others just wanting to reconnect. Emma learned to distinguish between genuine relationships and opportunistic contact. Her former landlord called, the one who'd been suing for back rent. Emma, I saw what you're doing. The housing project. It's incredible. I was hoping we could talk about expanding to Wyoming. Maybe partnering? Emma had Carol respond. The message was polite but firm. Ms. Torres is not interested in partnerships with individuals who sued her for rent when she was struggling. The foundation operates independently. That felt good. Setting boundaries. Refusing to let people who'd been cruel during poverty suddenly become friends during wealth. The first anniversary of finding the opals approached. Emma planned a small ceremony at the Cobra PDE mine site. She'd purchased the surrounding land, protected it, created a small memorial to Marianne Torres. The plaque read, Marianne Torres, 1940 to 2024. She spent 60 years protecting what mattered. Her greatest treasure wasn't the opal she found, but the future she made possible for those who came after. Robert from Cobra PDE attended. Margaret Shin traveled from Adelaide despite her age. 20 local residents who'd known Marianne came to honor a woman they'd thought had failed, but who'd actually succeeded beyond anyone's understanding. Emma spoke briefly. My grandmother and I never met, but she knew me anyway, knew my birthday, knew my daughter's birthday, knew that someday we'd need what she protected. She carried guilt for 60 years over an accident that wasn't her fault, lived in isolation to keep secrets she thought were necessary. And she left us everything. She paused, looking at the crater where it had all begun. I hope she's at peace now, knowing that what she protected is being used the way she would have wanted, to help people, to create opportunities, to make sure other families don't have to choose between medicine and rent, between food and heat, between survival and dignity. Sofia placed flowers at the memorial. White roses, Marianne's favorite, according to residents who remembered. That evening, Emma stood at the same spot where she'd stood a year earlier, where she thought she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, where she'd been ready to turn around and go home empty-handed. The desert sunset painted everything gold and purple, the same colors of the opals that had changed everything. Carol appeared beside her. Were you thinking that my grandmother was smarter than anyone knew? That protecting something valuable sometimes means hiding it. That broken things can be beautiful if you're patient enough to preserve them. You've done well with what she gave you. Emma considered that. Had she done well? She'd built housing, funded clinics, created educational programs. But she'd also struggled with guilt. Why did she deserve this fortune? What had she done beyond being born to the right family? I didn't earn this, Emma said quietly. I just found it, and you're using it well. That's what matters. Not how you got it, but what you do with it. Maybe Carol was right. Maybe inheritance didn't have to be earned. Maybe the value was in what you built with what you've been given. 6 months later, the Marianne Torres Foundation had built 3 housing complexes, opened 5 medical clinics, and funded scholarships for 200 students. The foundation's endowment generated enough income to sustain operations indefinitely. Emma hired staff from communities she was serving. People who understood poverty because they'd lived it, who knew what families needed because they needed the same things. The Foundation's first annual report showed they'd served 8,000 people, housed 350 families, provided medical care to 2,000 patients, given scholarships to students who otherwise couldn't afford college. Numbers that represented actual lives changed. Actual families who didn't have to choose between impossible options. Emma framed the report and hung it in her office next to Marianne's letter. The letter that had started everything. That had convinced her to get on a plane when everyone said she was wasting her time. Sofia, now 8, asked questions Emma was still learning to answer. Mama, why did great-grandma give us so much money? Because she wanted you to have opportunities she never had. She wanted you to grow up without worrying about things kids shouldn't have to worry about. Did it work? Emma thought about Sofia's life, now versus the life they'd had a year ago. Private school, medical care, security, a home that was actually theirs. Yeah, baby, it worked. Good. Great-grandma was smart. The 2nd anniversary approached. Emma had been invited to speak at a conference on sudden wealth management. Patricia had suggested it might help others navigating similar transitions. Emma stood on stage in front of 300 people who'd inherited, won, or otherwise acquired sudden fortunes. They came from everywhere, different backgrounds, different circumstances, all dealing with the same fundamental disruption of having money when they'd never had it before. 2 years ago, I was calculating whether I could afford ramen. Today, I'm worth $470 million. The transition isn't magical. It's disorienting, overwhelming, sometimes terrifying. She talked about guilt, about feeling undeserving, about the pressure to spend wisely, to not waste what you've been given, about relationships that changed or disappeared entirely. The hardest part isn't managing the money. It's managing yourself. Not losing who you were while becoming who you're now expected to be. Not letting wealth define you more than it supports you. After the speech, dozens of people approached with their own stories. A man who'd inherited $80 million from an uncle he'd barely known. A woman who'd won $60 million in the lottery. A couple who'd sold a startup for $200 million. all of them struggling with versions of Emma's experience. She exchanged contact information, promised to stay in touch, created an informal network of people who understood what it meant to suddenly have everything when you'd had nothing. That evening, back in her Denver home, Emma received an email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line read, "From your grandmother." Her heart stopped. Spam, probably, or a scam. But she opened it anyway. Inside was a video file, dated 2023, a year before Marianne died. Emma clicked play with shaking hands. Her grandmother appeared on screen. Elderly, frail, sitting in what looked like a dugout home. The resemblance to Emma's mother was shocking. Same bone structure, same dark eyes, same way of holding herself with dignity despite circumstances. "Emma," Marianne's voice was weak but clear. "If you're watching this, you found the opals. You solved the combinations. You did what I hoped you'd do." She coughed, paused, continued. "I need you to know some things. Things I couldn't say in the letter because I wasn't sure you'd understand. Things I need you to understand now." Marianne explained about the accident, about William and Thomas Chun, about the guilt that had consumed her for 60 years, about living in isolation because she couldn't face the possibility of causing more harm. "I found the opals before the accident. 1963 and 64. Major strikes. Beautiful stones. I was young and excited and convinced I'd found my fortune. I expanded my excavation, went deeper, went wider, and the Chun brothers' mind collapsed. Maybe because of geological instability I caused. Maybe not. The investigators said no, but I could never be certain." Tears ran down Marianne's weathered face. "So I stopped mining, sealed the opals in that vault, lived like I had nothing because revealing wealth would raise questions about when I'd found it, about whether I'd been working illegally after the accident, about whether I deserved to profit from stones I'd collected while 2 men died nearby." She wiped her eyes. "I followed your life from a distance. Your mother, my daughter, she was angry I'd left. She didn't understand why I couldn't come back to America. Couldn't be the grandmother you needed. I wanted to explain. But how do you tell your daughter you're hiding because you're not sure if you're a murderer?" Emma's own tears made the screen blur. "I'm telling you this because I need you to know. The opals are yours. Use them however you want. But know that they came with cost. Know that I paid that cost for 60 years. Know that sometimes wealth and guilt occupy the same space. And sometimes you have to decide which one defines you." Marianne leaned closer to the camera. "I hope you build something good. I hope you help people the way I wanted to help, but was too broken to attempt. I hope you're stronger than I was. I hope you're brave enough to use what I gave you instead of hiding from it." The video ended. Emma sat in darkness, crying for a grandmother she'd never known, for 60 years of unnecessary guilt, for a life spent in isolation protecting something for someone she'd never meet. Sofia appeared in the doorway. "Mama, why are you crying?" Emma pulled her close. "Because great-grandma thought she was broken. But she wasn't. She was brave. She was strong. She protected something beautiful through 60 years of guilt that wasn't deserved. And now we get to prove that her sacrifice mattered." 3 years after finding the opals, the Marianne Torres Foundation had expanded to 6 states, 20 housing complexes, 15 medical clinics, 50 scholarship programs. The foundation served 40,000 people annually. Emma had learned to live with wealth. Not comfortably. She still felt guilty spending money on herself. But functionally, she had a good team, good advisors, good people helping her build what Marianne had made possible. Sofia was thriving. Honor roll student, soccer player, normal kid who happened to have a trust fund that would ensure she'd never experience the poverty her mother had known. Emma still thought about that day in the Australian desert, standing at the crater's edge, thinking she'd made a terrible mistake. Sofia throwing rocks and hearing the hollow sound. Everything had hinged on that moment, on not giving up, on investigating instead of leaving, on being willing to take one more step when logic said to turn around. Patricia had been right. Money changed everything. But Emma had learned something Patricia hadn't mentioned. Money revealed things. About who you were. About what mattered. About whether you'd use fortune to build or just to consume. Emma chose building. Every day, every decision. She chose to honor what Marianne had protected by using it the way Marianne would have if guilt hadn't paralyzed her. The Marianne Torres Foundation's 5th anniversary gala was attended by 300 people. Donors, board members, families who'd been helped by foundation programs. Emma stood on stage looking out at faces that represented actual change accomplished. 5 years ago, I was poor. I didn't expect that to change. Poverty isn't something you escape through hard work alone. The system is designed to keep you there. And I would have stayed there except for one thing. My grandmother spent 60 years protecting something she thought was cursed. Something she collected while other people suffered. Something she couldn't reveal without risking everything she'd built. Emma pulled out Marianne's letter. The original. Worn now from being read hundreds of times. She wrote that she left me the one thing that mattered. I thought she meant the opals, the money, the fortune, but I was wrong. What mattered was the proof that broken things can be beautiful, that guilt doesn't have to be paralyzing, that protecting something valuable for someone you'll never meet is its own form of love. She looked at Sofia, sitting in the front row, 11 years old now, confident and happy. My grandmother never met me, never met my daughter. But she knew us anyway, knew our birthdays, knew we'd need what she'd protected. And she was right. We needed it. Not just the money, but the proof that family means something even across decades and oceans. That legacy is real. That sacrifice matters. The gala raised an additional $10 million for foundation programs. Money that would fund 3 more housing complexes, 2 more medical clinics, scholarships for 500 students. That night, Emma stood on her balcony. She bought a modest house in Denver with mountain views and thought about everything that had led to this moment. Her mother dying young, her grandmother dying alone, her own years of poverty and struggle. The phone call from an Australian lawyer about a worthless mine, the decision to see it anyway. Sofia throwing rocks, the hollow sound, the vault, the opals. Everything had been impossible until it wasn't. Everything had been worthless until it became priceless. Emma pulled out her phone, sent a text to the group of sudden wealth recipients she'd stayed in touch with. 3 years ago, I inherited $750 million. Today, I learned that the real inheritance was permission to be generous, permission to help, permission to use what you have to make sure others don't suffer the way you suffered. Responses came back immediately, from the lottery winner in Texas, the startup founder in California, the inheritance recipient in New York. All of them agreeing, all of them understanding. Wealth meant responsibility. Fortune meant obligation. Having everything meant making sure others had enough. Emma had learned that from Marianne, from 60 years of protection and sacrifice, from a grandmother who'd thought she was hiding wealth from guilt, but who was actually preserving it for purpose. Purpose Emma was now fulfilling. Every day, every foundation decision, every family housed, every patient treated, every student educated. This was what Marianne had left her. Not money, not opals, but the understanding that broken people protect beautiful things because they know what it means to be broken, because they understand value in ways whole people never can. Emma looked at the Denver skyline, at the city that was now home, at the life she'd built on foundations laid by a grandmother she'd never known. Thank you, she whispered to Marianne's ghost, to memory of sacrifice, to proof that sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what you receive but what you do with it. Behind her, Sofia appeared. Mama, are you coming inside? It's cold. Emma turned, smiled, took her daughter's hand. Yeah, baby, I'm coming. They went inside together, to warmth, to security, to life built on opals and sacrifice and 60 years of protection by a woman who'd thought she'd failed, but who'd actually succeeded beyond any measure that mattered. Emma had been poor. Now she was rich. But the real transformation wasn't financial. It was understanding that inheritance meant more than money. It meant memory, legacy, proof that family persists even when separated by decades and distance. Marianne Torres had given Emma everything. Not just wealth, but purpose, permission to build, freedom to help, and most importantly, Proof that broken things deserve protection, because sometimes what looks worthless contains treasures beyond anyone's ability to measure. Emma would spend the rest of her life honoring that gift, building what Marianne couldn't, helping who Marianne couldn't reach, being generous in ways Marianne's guilt had prevented. And someday, when Sofia was old enough to understand, Emma would tell her the full story. About a great-grandmother who'd hidden a fortune for 60 years, who'd carried guilt that wasn't deserved, who'd protected beautiful things through isolation and sacrifice, who'd proved that sometimes the greatest wealth isn't what you keep, but what you give to people you'll never meet. That was Marianne's real legacy, and Emma would make sure it lasted forever. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.